Welcome, my name is Colleen Tauke and I'm a sewing specialist here at Fons and Porter. In this Quilting Quickly tutorial, I'm going to show you how to put together the quilt called Ragtime. If you'd like to purchase this pattern, please visit our website. We're going to be doing a quilt as you go kind of project so that there's no sending it off to the quilter when you're completed. We're going to be using children's print flannels in 10-inch pre-cut squares, and we're going to be able to create those wonderful blocks you see behind me. Okay, from those 10-inch squares, we are going to cut a certain number of them into 9-inch squares, because then we're going to also take another set of them and we're going to cut them in half both directions so that we have a collection of 5-inch squares. Now the math on this is a little different. We're used to, as quilters, using 1/4-inch seam allowances. Note, this uses 1/2-inch seam allowances. So if it's hard for you to remember, maybe even mark your sewing machine with a piece of tape or put a sign up that reminds you 1/2-inch seams or things won't fit together properly. So once you've cut some of the large squares, the required number, follow the pattern for how many of the large 9-inch squares you need, and the number of 5-inch squares, it's time to start the process. I've got a 10-inch square or a 9-inch square here finished. They work the same as the small. You need to cut batting. If you're a quilter and you've always kept all those scraps of batting and you have a pile of them in small strips and you wonder, what will I ever do with them? This is the project for that. You're going to be cutting squares that are 8 inches, so it's 1 inch smaller than each of the squares. These are 4. And you're going to be putting the batting between layers. This is where the quilt as you go comes in. Lay that in the center, and you're going to then stitch through in an X, or you could do double lines going different directions. Experiment. You could make this a wavy line if you like. You can use a serpentine stitch on your sewing machine, or you can do the simple X like this. So what we're going to be doing is, some people are cautious about trying to drive a straight line across the fabric. Others just go across and are fine with it. But you can either use a friction pen or a chalk line pen. Test on your fabric to see what works best for you. Just a simple line across. This is a friction pen that is removed with heat from the iron. So if you just get warm steam near it, the lines would disappear. Making an X, then sandwich this. Layer that together. Take it to the sewing machine. Now if you have a walking foot, this is the time to put the walking foot on your sewing machine. It will stretch a little bit and distort if you don't put it on. It just depends on what you have available. If you haven't used your walking foot very much, this might be the time to try it out. I don't have mine on here. I will show you if it does distort, you'll be able to see how much, and maybe then that will encourage you to go to your walking foot and use that for the stitching. The nice part about a baby ragtime project like this is that you're going to be clipping all of the seam allowances when you're finished. So if things aren't exactly perfect, it doesn't really matter. There's not too much distortion in this block. When you're sewing a diagonal across, you tend to get a little bit of stretch. Now see, my markings on there I didn't stay exactly on the line, but remember, those lines are just suggestions. I can take it to the iron with a friction pen, which we do sell on our website, and once it gets near warm, all those lines disappear. Now, in my example, I used a white thread so you can't see the stitching. I used red so you could see actually where I stitched on this one. So it's your choice of what color thread you want to do, contrasting, you want to do a variegated, designer's choice. Now, in order to create the 4 patches like this, I'll lay it back down. So you've got 2 blocks back to back. You're going to then use a 1/2-inch seam allowance there. Press the seam open. That's different than most of the time with quilting. We press seams to one side. Here we're pressing the seam allowances open. And you're going to create 2 patch and a 2 patch here. Again, press the seam allowance open. And then join them with a second 1/2-inch seam allowance here, so that all of the seam allowances are exposed. This is the right side of your quilt. kind of have to think a little bit differently when we're working on rag quilts. Now, if this were the completed quilt, I would have a large square, this next door, and then one here, and alternate between the large squares and the 4 patches, as you can see in the quilt behind me. Again, you would be joining these edges together, your 1/2-inch seam allowance here, and press your seam open there. Now, the last portion of this quilt, when you've got everything connected, is to do the clipping, which takes a little bit of time and patience, but pick a line of seam allowances, and you want to snip into the seam allowance, not through the stitching, but up to it, and about every 1/4 to 3/8 inch along that seam allowance, right through everything like this, even through the thick pieces. If you have a spring-loaded scissors, it works really great, but a normal sewing scissors will work also. And that creates that fringed effect there. And when you put it into the washing machine then, you get that kind of napped, kind of raggy effect on all of the seams. Now the last thing you want to do before you do wash is to go all the way around, and I usually stitch, again, that 1/2-inch seam all along the outer edge of the quilt and do the clipping there too. Do remember though that because this is causing a little bit of raveling, a little bit of shedding of fibers, make sure you wipe out your washing machine when you're done, or use a commercial washing machine, and make sure to check the lint filter on your domestic clothes dryer often so that you don't have a backup of extra lint in there. It's a great way to make a fun quilt really quickly. Don't have to send it to the quilters, and it'll be enjoyed for years to come. If you'd like to see more of our Quilting Quickly videos, please visit our website. Thanks for joining me today.